Okay, folks, welcome back. We are still on clause by clause consideration of C10. Most of you now must know the rules, of course. For those of you who are listening outside and this is your first time joining us, welcome. This is democracy, Canadian democracy at its best. We go clause by clause through the bill. We've had some amendments thus far, and we're continuing. I'll get to that in just a moment, but just a reminder to everybody, the way we do this is if you hear us talking letters and numbers, that's the particular amendments put forward by each group with us at committee. In other words, if you hear us say PV1, that would be Parti Vert, the Green Party amendment. We have CPC one, that would be from the Conservative members on the committee. Lib would be from the Liberal members. Bloc BQ and NDP amendments coming from the New Democrats. And finally, G, as in G1 or G2, would be amendments from the government. Okay, that being said, are there any questions before we go? Any issues? No, because I'm going to start this one fairly quickly since I think we know most of the machinations that happen. So I'll get to our guests later from the department, but I will say thank you again for joining us. And I want to say all the best to everyone. Hope you have a safe week, no matter where you are. Okay, let's get back to the business at hand. We go back to clause by clause. We are currently at, and this is a newer version of what we had before. This is BQ15N. We go to the new page, BQ15N, and I think I'm going to Mr. Champoux.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And good day to my colleagues, and hello, everyone. BQ15N, here's what we want to do with this. On the one hand, we want to keep the license registry. There is also a clause to establish categories for online undertakings. That would not be the same licensing as for traditional broadcasting undertakings. We're thinking of having a category for online undertakings, which we think is very relevant to help the CRTC to better carry out its regulation duties. And the last category also talks about establishing the length of validity for the license. It also must be possible for licenses to be renewed for a fixed or indefinite term, and the Commission must have the ability to revoke the license. So now I'm ready to discuss it.
Mr. Bruce.
My grave concern with this proposal is its overbreadth, that it would simply cover all of the internet in the end, rather than only the ones that have the larger impact that we would be concerned about. Everyone would be required to register in its first instance, and perhaps the department can help to clarify what would be the impact of this amendment. How broad would its scope be for requiring registrations?
Sorry, folks. Monsieur Champ. Oh, sorry, you're going to the department? Is that what did I get that correct? Okay. Mr. Ripley, and then we go to Mr. Champoux after. Mr. Ripley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everybody. So if I understand the amendment correctly, perhaps I'd comment on two elements of it. The first element of it relates to reintroducing the idea that there could be conditions of license that take the form of contributing to the policy objectives of the Act. And this is similar to a Green Party amendment that we spoke about on Friday. And so just to perhaps recap, Bill C10 seeks to move away from a regime whereby the expenditure requirements, contributions that broadcasting entities are required to make are contained within their license, their actual authorization to operate. Instead, as I think the committee is aware, Bill C-10 creates new powers for the CRTC, new order-making powers at 9.1, and new regulation-making powers. And those orders making powers and those regulation making powers are meant to substitute for the old conditions of license. And if you look at the wording of 9.1, the order making powers, for example, you will see that they are able to apply to a category, a class of undertakings, but they're also able to apply to an individual undertaking if the need requires, right? So just as in the old world, when you had a condition of license and maybe you needed a unique condition of license specific to one company, the CRTC still has that power at 9.1. And so the concern would be that if the committee reintroduces the idea of conditions of service, it muddies the waters about the type of instrument that should be used to impose conditions on companies. Moving forward, not only would a company potentially be subject to regulation and relevant orders, but it could also be subject to additional requirements specific in their conditions of license. We heard from Mr. Manley on Friday that one of his concerns related to the idea of enforcement. How do you know that companies are actually meeting the requirements of their license? And this generally waits until the renewal of the license. C10, outlines a different vision whereby, as we outlined, companies would be subject to an administrative monetary penalty where they're not in compliance. And the idea behind that is the CRTC take a much more active, regular enforcement stance vis-a-vis broadcasters. And so the idea behind Bill C10 is that broadcasters, you shouldn't have to wait until the renewal of their license to be able to go to the CRTC and say that a company is not compliant, but rather you can, Bill C10 outlines a perspective that you should be able to go to the commission, say this broadcaster is not meeting their requirements, and the CRTC would be able to do an investigation on that right away. The second piece relates to the registration requirement, and perhaps I would just indicate on this one that Bill C10 took the stance that registration is not intended to be permission to operate in Canada. So once again, Bill C10 starts to regulate various online undertakings, various internet-based companies, and the government was very clear that it didn't want to set the CRTC up as a gatekeeper before a company could launch its business online, that the CRTC would have the ability to say yes or no. That stance goes against, I think, goes against the idea of an open and free internet. And so the registration regime contemplated by Bill C10, and I would remind the committee that there is the CRTC at paragraph 10.1 little I can make regulations respecting the registration of broadcasting undertakings in Canada, but that was intended to facilitate essentially them knowing the contact information, the way to get in touch with these companies. It was not intended to be substituted for a permission to operate in Canada. And so my understanding, based on what Mr. Champoux outlined, that if the idea is to suspend or revoke a registration or something like that, it seems to be setting the CRTC up much more as a gatekeeper role with a permission to operate, and that would would have implications for a free and open internet and the ability for online undertakings to offer their services without first having to go and seek permission from the CRTC. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Ripley. Mr. Housefather.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I read the amendment. I'm opposed to this amendment completely because I think this is a broad overreach. It's essentially regulating all of the internet. It's going to kill small businesses. It's going to, I mean, it seems to say that every website would have to register with the CRTC, no matter how small. I mean, I think this is just goes far too much. And I guess I wanted to ask the department, given the excessive amount of power that seems to be given to the CRTC here, is there any other country that you're aware of that would have such an overreaching scope of regulation on the internet, if this were adopted the way it is now?
I'm going to go to Mr. Ripley and then Mr. Shampoo. Mr. Ripley.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Housefather. As far as I'm aware, when we look at comparator countries, liberal democracies, the answer to that would be no. Those countries that are, like Canada, moving forward with broadcasting regulation that seeks to include streaming activities within its scope. So when you look at the EU, for example, there is a recognition in those jurisdictions as well that the business model between a conventional broadcaster that traditionally has to hold a license and the business model of streaming services is different. And C10 again seeks to ensure a level playing field, a more fair system, and have these players contribute. But Bill C10 was very intentional about not extending a licensing model to internet-based companies.
Mr. Shampoo.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Many things were said and many reactions had. First, the question by Mr. Housefather that he asked Mr. Ripley. I would like to say that we don't always have to wait for other countries to act. In 1999, there was a very controversial decision, but the unfair system that our Canadian players have had to try to survive in since is something we should look at. And I think we should act now instead of waiting for a model to be created somewhere else in the world for us to draw inspiration from. Let's act ourselves based on what we want to put in place, and I think we have a duty to do that. Now, when it comes to registry of undertakings, I understand the concerns. For example, which undertakings should be targeted. And that is why I gave the power to establish categories. The CRTC would have the power to establish the categories. Here, BQ 16, which we will discuss later, would say that certain undertakings would not have to register and that certain terms can be revised later once that undertaking starts to have a bigger impact on the broadcasting system. We also have BQ 34, which is another amendment the BQ will propose, which makes it possible to be an online undertaking without registering and without needing to be a licensee. These are 4 undertakings that do not have a significant impact on the broadcasting system. I think there is a way to make the market fair for the businesses that are evolving in our country. This will make sure that foreign companies as well, or rather, not to leave the internet free, but foreign players will come in and the environment will remain fair for our players. I think that our situation is unique, and we are the ones who should put in place the rules by which other players will have to participate. I think that our system must be fair for all players, and that is the reasoning behind BQ 15.
Ms. de Bruzen.
Okay. I'm just, I'm very concerned about the fact that this would end up regulating all of the internet. It's just when I'm listening to what the department said, I'm concerned about the overregulation of small businesses, and as much as we're trying to work through this bill, to try and bring in, web giants. The plan isn't for us to regulate all of the internet. That is not the intention. It just seems like I mentioned to be a great overbreadth of the powers that we intend to give to the CRTC and that where we intend to go with this. So I oppose this and am very uncomfortable with the scope of this amendment.
Monsieur Reyes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Reyes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Given that this is a new meeting, we had already started discussing BQ 15. I just want to be sure of something. Regarding Section G, is Section G still part of the amendment or has it been removed? I'm very confused, but this is important, to know which we're voting on. Is G part of this amendment? And this might help us to make a decision to be for or against.
I see you wish to respond, Mr. Champoux.
Oui, effectivement.
Yes, I'll answer Mr. Reyes' question. So this is BQ 15N. It already has been amended. We removed Section G. So BQ 15N does not include that section.
Monsieur Reyes.
Mr. Reyes?
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have another question for department officials on this subject. Could you tell me what the difference is between having taken out G? What difference removing that section had?
Looking for volunteer. Oh, there we go, Mr. Ripley.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Reyes. So if I understood, there was an initial amendment that would have given powers to the CRTC to regulate contractual proceedings. That element certainly would have had an impact on the bill because that power is not currently established for the CRTC or laid out in the bill for the CRTC. Therefore, that section certainly would have changed Mr. Champoux's amendment. But as I just explained, there are always places where contract elements could be reintroduced and parts regarding registration as well. Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no further conversation or debates, we now go to a vote. Once again, I remind everybody if I will ask for it to carry. If I hear silence, it will be carried. If I hear a no, I will go to a vote unless otherwise instructed to do it on division. You can either say on division, which means carried on division, or no or negative on division. Okay. That being said, let's now go to the vote. Shall BQ 15N carry?
No.
No.
Okay. We now go to a vote. Madam Clerk?
On the amendment BQ and BQ15N. Mr. Housefather.
No.
Madame Bissette.
No.
Ms. DeBruson.
No.
Ms. Ian.
No.
Mr. Lewis.
No.
Monsieur Reyes. Monsieur Reyes. On peut retourner à Monsieur Reyes. Mr. Aitchison.
No.
Mr. Shields.
No. Sorry, I did not vote there.
Yeah, sorry, can I
Called my
just
name,
interrupt?
but Alain Reyes actually answered.
Sorry,
Oh,
one
I'm
second.
so sorry.
One second, folks. I'm just going to hang out for 1 second. Yes, what had happened there was that Mr. Reyes came in late. He may have been recorded as I'm assuming, Mr. Aitchison's vote. So
Okay.
how about we start with Mr. Reyes again, and then proceed with the rest of the members from the Conservatives and other parties. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you very much for the clarification, Mr. Sims. Monsieur Reyes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Non.
Mr. Aitchison.
No.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Shields.
No.
Okay, Mr. Waugh.
No.
Mr. Shampoo.
Oui.
Ms. McPherson.
Oui.
Nine nays, 2 yeas.
I declare the amendment negative. Now, folks, we go to, in your hymn book, CPC 8. CPC 8. And I see it's submitted by Mr. Reyes. Will you be speaking to this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is CPC 8. And I'm sure you've read it. We think that the mandate of Radio-Canada CBC should be modernized throughout the Broadcasting Act. We proposed a number of amendments to ensure that the CRTC would make sure CBC, Radio-Canada, respects its mandate. So with this amendment, we hope that you will support it to make sure that CBC Radio-Canada behaves in an equitable way with all other players.
Yes, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know what, as a member of Parliament, as a member of the arts community, I do not think this amendment is in the scope of the bill because the Broadcast Act is not focused on the CBC. We're talking about web giants contributing their fair share. So I'm concerned with this motion's intent to have recourse to actually attack the CBC. In my writing, constituents care deeply about CBC. We're proud of the work it does and the stories it tells. And this issue came up in my writing in 2017 when Conservative MP at the time voted to defund the CBC. So this amendment's worrisome in my view. CBC is an independent Crown agency. It's got a board. It has an ombudsperson. It reports to Parliament. It has a demonstrative process to ensure that it follows its mandate. Adding CRTC as a watchdog to the CBC, which already licenses them, is not necessary in my opinion. And CRTC already goes through a wholesome process to provide the CBC and Radio Canada with its license to operate that. So for reasons above there, I do not believe that it's up to the CRTC to decide what the CBC's mandate is. And I'm opening for discussion. Thanks.
Mr. Shampoo.
Je suis quand même un peu curieux d'entendre.
I'm curious to hear Mr. Reyes go into further detail. Because here's my understanding of this amendment. What is being asked is simply for the CRTC to ensure that CBC's mandate is respected. To me, this doesn't seem so fearsome, but I would like to hear Mr. Reyes speak more about the intent behind this amendment.
Ask and you shall receive. Mr. Reyes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm pleased that this question was asked. I have a hard time understanding the Liberals. How can they disagree with this amendment, asking simply for CBC to respect its role as the broadcaster? There is nothing binding in this other than CBC to be made respect its mandate. Period. If the Liberals want to vote against an amendment for this broadcaster to respect its mandate, well, they can go ahead, but I don't know how people will understand that. It's quite surprising.
Okay. Seeing nobody else on my speakers list, we will now go to a vote. Again, I remind you, the CPC 8. Shall CPC 8 carry?
No.
No.
Okay. We now go to a vote. Madam Clerk?
Yes, sir. On CPC 8, Mr. Housefather.
No.
Madame Bissette.
No.
Ms. DeBruson.
No.
Ms. Ian.
No.
Mr. Lewis.
No.
Monsieur Reyes.
Oui.
Mr. Aitchison.
Yes.
Mr. Shields.
Yes.
Mr. Waugh,
Yes.
Mr. Champoux,
En faveur.
Ms. McPherson.
No.
6 nays, 5 yeas. Sorry,
Go ahead.
yeah, 6 nays, 5 yeas. My apologies.
6 nays, 5 yeas.
Yes, sir.
Correct? Okay. I declare CPC 8 negatived. Thank you. Now we go to BQ 16. BQ 16. Mr. Champoux.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In BQ 16, we are proposing to allow the CRTC to review
Et on ajouterait aussi à la page
We would add on page 6 the possibility for the Commission to review the exemption order if it considers compliance with the order to have a significant effect on the implementation of the Canadian broadcasting policy.
Okay. Do I see any further comments? Any further debates? Again, we are on BQ 16. Seeing no further conversation, we now go to a vote. Again, shall BQ 16 carry?
No.
Hearing no. Okay, we now go to a vote. Madam Clerk.
BQ 16, Mr. Housefather,
No.
Wait,
Madam-
sorry. Can I revoke my no?
Sorry, Madam
Okay.
DeBruze.
I apologize.
One second, everybody. One second. I need everyone to just, I don't need a mishmash of conversations across everyone here. I need someone to recognize to begin with. I had Ms. DeBruzen, and then I'll go to Mr. Housefather. Ms. DeBruzen.
I apologize. I was kind of following along and said no, but actually I am not opposed to this, and I expect that given you had no comments, that it would actually pass without need for a recorded division.
Okay, Mr. Housefather.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I think we were looking at the wrong one. I'm fine with this one.
Okay, I know we're in a virtual world and sometimes this stuff gets confused. What I'm going to do then is I'm just going to call the question again. We go back to BQ 16, everyone, so that there's no confusion. We haven't advanced. We are still on BQ 16. Shall BQ 16 carry?
That's
Carried. And that brings us to the end of Clause 6, which invites the inevitable question, shall Clause 6 as amended carry?
No.
I hear no. Okay.
on division.
Can I
No.
proceed on division? No. Mr. Reyes, you want a recorded vote?
No.
All right. So we now go to a recorded vote.
Yes, please.
Sorry, my apologies. Sometimes I forget that the translation to catch up. I apologize. So we're going to go to a recorded vote. Madam Clerk.
on clause 6,
Inc-
Mr. Housefather,
Yes.
Madame Bessette,
Oui.
Ms. DeBrusen,
Oui.
Ms. Ian,
Yes.
Mr. Lewis,
Yes.
Monsieur Reyes,
No.
Mr. Aitchison,
No.
Mr. Shields,
No.
Mr. Waugh,
No.
Monsieur Champoux,
Oui.
Ms. McPherson.
Yes.
Seven yeas, 4 nays.
I declare the clause Carried as amended. And before we go on to clause 7, our legislative clerk, Mr. Miller, I believe you have a comment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to point out on BQ 16, if you look on the second line in the French version, there is a duplication of la, sans conséquence importante sur la mise en œuvre. Can we understand the amendment being adopted without the duplication of la?
I think you could probably get acceptance for that. I'm seeing a lot of nods in the room. So yes, please do fix as necessary. Thank you, Mr. Miller, for pointing that out. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Without further ado, if you're as excited as I am, we're going on to clause 7. Just moving right along. To start clause 7, we are going to start with PV19. And before we go into the debate, because it's been deemed moved as it is from the Green Party, before we do PV19, I'm just going to make note. If PV19 is adopted, BQ17 and NDP11 cannot be moved as they are identical. If PV19 is a no or negatived, so are BQ17 and NDP11 for the same reason as they are identical. So let's proceed with debate. Mr. Manley, this would be you, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the bill introduces conditions of service, and this amendment applies a 7-year maximum on conditions of service, the same term that currently applies to licenses under the existing Act. Conditions of service should be subject to periodic mandatory review, and the organizations that supported this were the Coalition for the Diversity of Cultural Expression and Société des Auteurs de Radio, Télévision et Cinéma. Thank you. I hope the committee will support this amendment.
Mr. Brusen.
First, I'd like to apologize for the confusion before. I'm working on 3 screens on one screen, and every now and then that becomes a little bit confusing for me. So I apologize for that one.
Mr. Brusen, if I may, trust me, folks, if you are having technical problems, there is a fair bit of leniency on this, simply because we're in a virtual world, which is new to our system, not envisioned by the standing orders that we have in the House and Commons, or at least most of them. Mr. Brusen, you have the floor.
Thank you. For PV19, this would end up having the impact that all of the orders, even non-controversial ones, would have to be reviewed every 7 years, which is quite burdensome as an approach to take. And I'd want to direct the committee's attention to G15, which would impose a duty on the CRTC to at least once every 7 years engage with parties to figure out which ones should be reviewed and then publish a plan for conducting the reviews. It is an approach that would be able to direct attention to what needs to be reviewed without requiring every single piece to be reviewed by the CRTC. So my recommendation is that this is not as strong of a way to go. But I will, but I am not opposed to doing it, just putting it out there as a thought. But I think that I would agree with it in term. It just seems like a lot of review.
Mr. Lewis.
Quick question to maybe perhaps the department. Just curious to see then the BQ17 and NDP11 would they're similar enough that they would not be consequential. Is that is my understanding? I just wanted to get clarification.
Just so that we're up before I go to the department, if they wish, this is a ruling from the table here about the similarities. I know what you meant, Mr. Lewis. Just want to make everyone clear that the ruling's not from the department. But nevertheless, you did inquire the department for further clarification. I'm looking for a volunteer once more from our department folk. Mr. Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In answer to Mr. Lewis's question, you answered it. Indeed, this is a this PV19, BQ17, and NDP11 would all have the same impact requiring the CRTC to review its conditions of service every 7 years. That's every condition of service that it might put on every broadcasting undertaking. It would require the CRTC to do a full review of all of that. And as Mr. Brusen indicated, I believe there's an amendment coming later that would have a slightly more flexible approach. Should this committee choose that approach, the CRTC would then be able to consult with stakeholders to determine if or what conditions of service need to be reviewed, and review those ones and set out sort of its plan so that stakeholders would know what the plan is and be able to prepare for it, rather than requiring every single condition of service to be reviewed every 7 years. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Brusen.
I just wanted to clarify, I have no strong opposition when I put this out there. I just wanted to be clear that there's G15 coming up that covers similar territory. But just so that we can just know that that was there and everybody's aware, because I think sometimes we're voting on things that have pieces that are coming up later, and it's good to kind of see what the options are. But regardless, I'm not voicing any strong opposition on this one here.
Mr. Champoux.
Effectivement, Monsieur.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I have a question for the legislative clerk. Would adopting PV19 or the other two identical amendments have the result of canceling G15, or would the two be complementary? Because as Mr. Reyes likes to say, you can never be too careful, and we can perhaps include both amendments. When I hear that these means are too restrictive, I would say we are writing a law, we are putting tools in place, and I think this is helpful. These must be enforced. The digital world is evolving, and I don't feel that this is excessive for us to impose such regulations. Now, does this, could we ask if this is in conflict with G15 if we adopted it?
Yes, you most certainly can. Since you referred to Mr. Mella, I'll let him take the floor. Mr. Mella, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's hard for me to comment on the content. At first glance, I would say it may be related, but maybe the department would be better suited to answer that question.
I guess at this stage, we'll go over to the department before I go back to Mr. Brusen. I see both Mr. Ripley and Mr. Olson. I'll go to Mr. Ripley.
Thank you for the question. My view is that they're getting the spirit of them is the same. As the committee is aware, in the conventional world, licenses had to be renewed, at a maximum of 7 years. Bill C10, as it was tabled, did not have a cap on the length of orders and conditions of service, and I am aware that the committee heard from stakeholders who expressed concern about that. As Mr. Olson highlighted, the government recognizes that there are certain, very important elements that will be done through orders. So if you look at the kind of things that are listed in 9.1, we talk about presentation of Canadian programming and certain things along those lines, and it will be important that those things, have an opportunity to be reviewed on a periodic basis, and that stakeholders have an ability to input into that. But you also look, there are more administrative things, like, I would point out to you the carriage of emergency messages, for example, and so the spirit of the government's amendment that Mr. Brusen alluded to gives the CRTC some flexibility to, again, tease out the issues that stakeholders want to engage on and let those orders that are more administrative in nature not be subject to, a process whereby it will be, more burdensome for both CRTC, but also the stakeholder community that would be expected to engage on those processes, right? So the spirit was to, again, tease out those things where there's a strong interest in them being reviewed, but acknowledge that there are going to be orders that are more administrative in nature, and the amendment before the committee right now would subject all orders to having to be renewed every 7 years, regardless of their administrative nature or not.
And just to reiterate again to everyone, what we're dealing with right now is, of course, PV 19, which affects BQ, which would attach to BQ 17 and NDP 11. There are striking similarities to a government amendment later, but this was the ruling that came from us as we decided how we wanted to proceed. I'm not seeing any more conversation or debates. Therefore, we now go to a vote. Again, I remind you, this is PV 19. Shall PV 19 carry?
No.
Hearing no, we now go to
On division?
No.
Can we say, can I say negative, no on division?
No. Je demande le vote.
I would like a vote.
Yes, sir. PV 19. Mr. Housefather.
No.
Madame Bissette.
No.
Ms. DeBruson.
No.
Ms. Ian.
No.
Mr. Lewis.
No.
Mr. Reyes.
No.
Mr. Aitchison.
No.
Mr. Shields.
No.
Mr. Waugh.
No.
Mr. Champoux.
Oui.
Ms. McPherson.
Yes.
Nine nays, 2 yeas.
I declare the amendment negative. As a result, for those of you following along on your agenda, since PV 9 has been negatived, we also have to negative both BQ 17 and NDP 11. Which means we now move on to BQ 18. Mr. Champoux.
Merci.
Thank you. In BQ 18, we specify something that hasn't often been specified regarding French language programming, asking broadcasting, when we ask undertakings to contribute, we want them to contribute in a new way, including first-run programs. That's why we propose this amendment, 8.1, in clause 91A, and it reads as follows. The proportion of Canadian programs to be broadcast that shall be French language original programs, including first-run programs. This is to prevent us to have translated old series that are translated or dubbed that are rerun to count as Canadian content. So we want for a percentage to be new content, including online undertakings. Thank you.
Madame Bissette.
Ms. Bissette. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Mr. Champoux's amendment is good. I believe that this should be part of Bill C-10 instead of being part of the Order in Council, so we will be supporting it. Thank you.
Monsieur Reyes.
Mr. Reyes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment is extremely wise. I would like to congratulate Mr. Champoux. We will also be supporting it.
All right. Seeing no, unless Madame Bissette, is your hand still up? Or? Okay. We now go to the votes. Shall BQ 18 carried. So carried, with a smattering of thumbs up across the board. Okay, we now go to G8, and just of note to everybody, if G8 is adopted, BQ19 and NDP12 cannot be moved due to a line conflict. We now go to G8. Do I see? Yes. Oh, yes, Ms. DeBruzen.
So this one is actually important for causing to make sure that there's discoverability and across the spectrum for programs and programming services. So for example, this would ensure that Canadian programming services like apps, which are quite popular, and channels and programs themselves be discoverable, or at least highly visible on broadcasting undertakings. So it's a piece to make sure that that is captured as well. And I see that there's other conversations, so I'll leave it to the other hands for now.
Ms. McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would, I will be supporting this this amendment. I would like to just add one word, so have one sub amendment if I could. I would like to add showcasing and right before discoverability, just to strengthen and enhance the amendment, if possible.
I'm sorry, Ms. McPherson. Could you detail again the word you want to?
Of course, sorry. So it will say, or I'll read the entire clause. The presentation of programs and programming services for selection by the public, including the showcasing and discoverability of Canadian programs and programming services.
Okay. I don't think we need to go any further, but clarifications or something in writing. I think what Ms. McPherson here is doing is she's adding the word showcasing to this particular amendment. So therefore now we need discussion on the sub-amendment as put forward by Ms. McPherson. Is everyone clear on what she's proposing here? Okay, so I can proceed with this. And seeing no conversation, we now call for a vote. Oh, sorry, Mr. Champoux.
Just
to make sure of procedure, Mr. Chair, if Ms. McPherson's sub-amendment is carried, is it still possible afterwards to add another sub-amendment in the same amendment that we're debating?
Yes. If you want to further amend, yes, but you can't do it within a sub-amendment. We have to dispense with this sub-amendment first, and then we can move on. Mr. Housefather.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, for just a clarification here. The word showcasing is not a word that you normally see in a law. And I just want to understand, what is the French translation? Would it be mettre en valeur? What is the right, how would we say this on the French side? Just because I wasn't listening, I'm on the floor, I'm not in the interpretation channel. Martin, est-ce que c'est mettre en valeur? Okay, merci.
Okay, so are you okay, Mr. Housefather, with that? Okay, let's go to Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe to the department in a sense of clarification, I think discoverability has been a term used. What would their view be on adding the word showcasing in the sense of what this would mean from the department? Because that's another adjective that's been added into it. What would they view this change in the sense of adding that word into it as what discoverability is?
Mr. Ripley.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Shields. The two terms seem related in the sense that both speak to increasing the visibility of Canadian programming or programming services. Discoverability perhaps is a broader term. Showcasing from my perspective speaks more to thinking about when you log on to a home screen or something like that, and you have the showcase of programs that are being displayed or advertised. To me, showcasing has more of that promotional element to it. Discoverability, I think, is a broader term. So my view is showcasing in some respects would be a one way to increase the discoverability of Canadian programming or programming services.
So just a follow-up question, Mr.
One
Chair.
second, Mr. Shields. Can I go to Ms. McPherson first and then come back to you? Ms. McPherson.
Mr. Chair, if Mr. Shields has a follow-up question, I'm happy to. I was just going to provide my own interpretation, but I'm happy to listen to that.
Mr. Shields.
So I can go to the marketing in a sense of if you walked into a store, you may see displays in certain sections that would show discoverability. But what you're talking about is the storefront out there in their window in a sense of showcasing something in the window on the street to get somebody to come into the store. I'm guessing that's how you're interpreting this to happen.
I'm oh, sorry, go ahead, Mr. Shields.
So the question then is, who's determining what goes in that storefront window?
I'm assuming your question is for the department. I see Mr. Ripley's hand up. Mr. Ripley.
Thank you, Mr. Shields. That would be my view of it. Is again that showcasing has a promotional aspect, although certainly defer to Ms. McPherson in terms of her reason for putting it forward and what she understands the amendment to be on that. It would be the CRTC, so we're in the context again of where the CRTC is being given certain order making powers. So, for example, the way that this could work in practice is you could imagine the CRTC making an order to, require again, a certain number of Canadian programs to be surfaced in terms of, programming that's offered to Canadians. But this could also speak to requiring them to showcase again, have the thumbnail, for example, on the landing page when you log into your streaming service. Have a proportion of that needs to be Canadian titles or Canadian programming. That's how I would understand what's on the table.
Ms. McPherson.
And just to clarify, that was what I was intending with the sub-amendment is the enhanced profile. So not just having it be having the discoverability, but ensuring that there's that enhanced promotion, that enhanced profile of Canadian content.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Shields, I'm assuming that you don't want anything else. Your hand is still risen. Thank you, folks. Seeing no further conversation, just to remind everybody, we are still on G8, but we are currently on the sub-amendment put forward by Ms. McPherson that adds the word showcasing before discoverability. So we'll now go to a vote. This is a vote on the sub-amendment from Ms. McPherson regarding G8. Shall the sub-amendment carry? Seeing no pointed resistance, Ms. McPherson is now carried. We now go to the main motion. Oh, sorry, Mr. Champoux, I believe you have something to add.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. I would also like to sub-amend the amended amendment by adding what is included in BQ19 regarding original French language programming. So G8 as amended, would include at the end, and programming services, comma, including original French language programming.
Okay, I think that's pretty straightforward. However, for fairness, I'm going to get because again, I'm not completely versed enough en français to do the full translation. So I'm going to ask Mr. Mela to repeat what was just put forward by Mr. Champoux as a sub-amendment to G8. Mr. Mela?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me just put my note together and I'll be right with you. I'm sorry. So I'm just going to read the French version first, and for my colleague interpreters, I'll do the English version afterwards. Donc, la version française se lirait B. la présentation des émissions et des services de programmation que peut sélectionner le public, y compris la mise en œuvre, y compris la mise en valeur et la découvrabilité des émissions canadiennes et des services de programmation canadiens, virgule, notamment les émissions de langue originale française.
Okay.
Et
I'm looking for a nod from Mr. Shampoo to see if he's okay with that. So it looks okay. Okay, Mr. Reyes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Reyes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. If that amendment were carried, for us, G8 would become much more acceptable.
Okay. Do I see any further conversation or debate? Seeing none, just a reminder, I think we're all clear now what's being proposed. This is the sub-amendment from Mr. Shampoo regarding G8. Shall the sub-amendment carry? And so carried. We now return to the main amendment, G8, as amended on a couple occasions. Seeing no further conversation, shall the amendment G8 carry as amended? And carried. Therefore, G8 now being adopted, BQ19 and NDP 12 cannot be moved due to a line conflict. I'm sure that comes as no shocker to any of you. That's BQ19 and NDP 12. Okay. Everyone caught up at this point? Now go back to PV 20. Mr. Mann.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Merci. Cet amendement.
Thank you. This amendment would add that the CRTC can take orders imposing conditions regarding of the official languages.
Specifically, this amendment adds the CRTC may impose conditions of service respecting the proportion of original language programs to be broadcast in each official language. The bill currently has a long list of what the CRTC can make with these orders about, but official languages were not included here in the first version of the bill. It's important to ensure that the presentation of original French language content in particular, this amendment would give the CRTC greater ability to ensure original language presentation is occurring in both official languages. Thank you.
Your house father.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I believe that we have already added this with BQ18. BQ18 also mentioned original French language programming. So I can't understand how we could adopt PV20 because this was already understood in the prior amendment.
Mr. Shampoo. No?
Personally, Mr. Chair, could we perhaps put the question to an official from the department to find out if the two amendments are redundant? We did address this in BQ18. Maybe it would be necessary to add it in two places. I'd like to hear from the department.
Okay. I see Ms. Choi.
Thank you for the question. I agree that the wording is quite similar. BQ18 speaks, however, to French language original programs. PV20 speaks to original programs to be broadcast in both official languages. And then I will also ask about BQ24, which I believe passed on the first day of study, which also had a similar element. But I'm a bit confused about the process there. So maybe there may be some connections to be made to BQ24 as well.
24 that is coming up, or because BQ 24 is
I believe that, if I remember correctly, BQ 24 may have passed as a result of carrying BQ 1.
Okay, let's go back to Mr. I can see clarification on that. Mr. Housefather.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, you had ruled when we had adopted the definition in BQ1 that was ancillary to Bloc Québécois 24, that Bloc Québécois 24 was also adopted. And again, I just want to come back to the question that Mr. Champoux just asked, because I'm not against the concept that in Green 20, but it seems to me we've dealt with this concept, in fact, in a broader way already with respect to French language original programming in BQ 18, in exactly the same area of the bill, where we're seeing that the CRTC can already rule, make regulations on that issue, on how much original French language programming, including original programming, should be carried. And I understand this one adds English programming to it, but it doesn't include the same words. So I'm just wondering, if we wanted to deal only with French language original programming, does PV20 add anything to BQ18 or not? I guess is my question. Is there something about this being in a different location that adds something? Or as I understand it, is in exactly the same place, and essentially already that regulation can be made by the CRTC? I hope that was clear enough for the department.
Now, are you
asking the department, of course.
One second. You're asking the department? Very well. I see,
Yeah.
Mr. Rip. Well, sometimes Mr. Housefather is not quite as evident. I apologize if I don't quite understand that. Mr. Ripley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question, Mr. Housefather. If the intention is to ensure that the CRTC has an order-making power to require that there be, a proportion of French language original programming, BQ 18 covers you. If that is the intention, and if that is the spirit behind PV 20, I do not believe it adds anything additional.
Now, Mr. Reyes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a question for the officials. Mr. Housefather told us that this resembles what we had already voted on in a prior amendment. I would just like the department to confirm that information for me, because I'm very confused. I just want to confirm. There's no problem, but I just want to ensure there's no redundancy. I don't want to add an amendment that wouldn't add anything further.
Mr. Ripley.
Merci, Monsieur le.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Reyes, for the question. So, for the intent, these two amendments are not identical, because PV 20 adds the idea of giving the CRTC the power to ensure the proportion of French, but also English language programming. And here the intention is that if PV20's essence is to ensure that the CRTC has that power for French language, original French language programming, I can tell you that, yes, absolutely, the committee has already voted on the prior amendment that already gave that power to the CRTC regarding original French language programming.
Mr. Reyes, do you wish to speak again, or?
No, thank you.
Okay, merci. Okay, seeing no further Ms. McPherson.
I was just going to suggest that perhaps we could have a health break if you needed more time to think about this one.
All right, your suggestion is to go to health break before we deal with PV 20. Okay, I see a lot of thumbs up on that. How about we go do our health break? And I appreciate you doing that, Ms. McPherson. In many ways, most people are aware. Thank you. So let's break. No more than 5 minutes, please, as we come back. And up to 5 minutes. We'll see you shortly. Suspension. Now, I was going to ask the question before, but with the health break was fine. This is the first for this particular session of C10, but that is, I would like to ask a question to the department, if I may. Just so that we're all clear, there's been some discussion about BQ 18 and PV 20s and the remarkable similarities therein. So my questions for the department, I think Mr. Ripley, you might be prepared for this, but in BQ 18, it seems to me at first blush, we have what we're looking at is a distinct way of describing the presence of French language as one of the official languages. Now, PV 20 covers both languages, but in BQ 18, is it the case that as adopted, that the English aspect will be covered as well, meaning that you've only identified that part, but does it follow logic that the rest would be covered under this particular bill through its interpretation, as per the department's interpretation? Mr. Ripley.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. The answer to that would be no. BQ 18, as drafted, only covers French programming. I would point, however, the committee to the fact, so BQ 18 adds a new order-making power for the CRTC. I would point the committee to subparagraph, 9.11 subparagraph A, which already in Bill C10 had provided the Commission with the ability to make orders with respect to the proportion of programs to be broadcast that shall be Canadian programs and the proportion of time that shall be devoted to the broadcasting of Canadian programs. And then it continues on with in B, the presentation of programs for selection by the public, et cetera, et cetera. So the CRTC, Bill C10 already had provided the CRTC with the ability to make orders with respect to Canadian programs, which would include English, French, third language, and Indigenous language programs. So in some respects, BQ 18, which includes A.1, is putting a special emphasis on the importance of the CRTC having a special order-making power with respect to French language. You are absolutely correct that PV20 is broader in that it speaks to both official languages. So my question would actually be for Mr. Manley in the sense of the intention or spirit of the amendment was it specifically a concern rooted in French language? If so, BQ 18 may already have covered you off. Is the intention to be more broader?
Okay, thank you for answering that. Ms. McPherson, then Mr. Manley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I had some of very similar questions, so I'm sure Mr. Manley will be able to answer them. But I'm just wondering what the impacts would be, of course, for Indigenous or non-official languages. So if you provide that clarity, that would be great.
Mr. Manley.
Yeah, originally this was to ensure the French language was included, and my original draft, they said it was inadmissible. So that's why we went for both official languages.
Okay, seeing no further discussion on this or clarity on the matter, we now go to a vote. Shall PV20 carry?
No.
Hearing no. Madam Chair.
Can we negative on division?
Sorry, Madam Clerk. There is a proposal, however, to put out a negative on division. We're okay with that? Very well then. PV20 negatived on division. We now go to BQ20. Mr. Champoux.
BQ20 vise à...
BQ20 aims to clarify something in the Act. In Section 112, requirement for a person carrying a distribution undertaking carried. But in the French version, there's mention of different wording, which is why we propose to specify all of this by proposing a requirement for a person carrying on a broadcasting undertaking to carry on the terms and conditions. But if anyone from the department would like to shine further light on this, then you can go ahead.
Input from the departments, Mr. Ripley.
Merci pour la...
Thank you for the question, Mr. Champoux. Yes, subparagraph E currently makes reference to, pardon me, I'm just reading through, a person carrying on a broadcasting undertaking, which is a subcategory of broadcasting undertaking. For example, there are cable carriers, and the CRTC uses its power to create regulations under the wholesale code, which regulates the relationship between cable providers and programming services. If I understood your amendment, it would be to expand that power. So not only to target distribution undertakings, but all broadcasting undertakings, including online undertakings.
Ms. DeBrusen.
Thank you. So one of the concerns I have, if everyone looks forward, they'll see there is G9, which is about a similar kind of discussion point. And what my main concern here is about trade risk in G9 rather than imposing. There is a good faith negotiation part that's in the last subclause to that motion. And the difference really is the imposition of these requirements on international companies and the potential for a very real trade risk that we would have to worry about. And that's certainly not something that we would want to bring into this because, well, that would all cause all sorts of extra complications for the system to work. And I'm sorry, my microphone is popping there, so I'm just going to move it.
It's okay. Okay, seeing no further conversation, no debates, no further debate. Just a reminder on BQ20. Go to a vote. Shall BQ20 carry?
No.
Hearing no, we now go to a vote. Madam Chair, or Madam Clerk.
On BQ20?
Yeah.
Mr. Housefather?
No.
Madame Bessette?
No.
Ms. de Bruson?
No.
Ms. Ian?
No.
Mr. Lewis?
No.
Monsieur Reyes?
Micro, Alain.
Monsieur Reyes? Et Monsieur Reyes, votre tige?
No.
Mr. Aitchison?
No.
Mr. Shields?
Nope.
Mr. Waugh?
No.
Monsieur Champoux?
Oui.
Ms. McPherson?
Oui.
Nine nays, 2 yeas.
I declare the amendment negative. Okay, now it's off to G9, briefly referenced before. G9, I'm looking, Ms. de Bruzen.
Thank you. There's always that moment trying to find the microphone. So I just referenced it, and I won't go too long into the conversation about this point, except for that this seeks to kind of cover the same ground that BQ20 sought to cover, but this time negating the trade risk and taking into account good faith negotiations.
Before we go to Mr. Champoux, I just want to point out to everyone that the vote on G9 applies to G16 as they are consequential to each other. Again, G9 will apply to G16. Now we go to Mr. Champoux.
J'ai une question.
I have a question concerning paragraph E.1. Talks about obligations for online undertakings to offer programming and so forth. Can we specify without terms or conditions? Does this mean that these online undertakings should, and I agree, broadcast Canadian programming, but does it mean that they would have absolutely no obligations in line with their revenue? And I'll tell you that the reason I have a problem with that is that we have Canadian broadcasters currently, and they must pay royalties and contributions. So conditions are imposed upon them to fund the programming services that they are going to present. So this is a time when we're trying to level the playing field and telling certain entities that they have to contribute, but online undertakings don't have to contribute. So I am wondering if this term, without terms or conditions, has a particular meaning, Or can we specify that there should be without terms or conditions, financial or no? Can that be specified, please?
Is that, sorry, Mr. Shampoo, is that a question for Ms. DeBruzen or the department?
Je commencerai peut-être par...
I might begin with Ms. DeBruzen, please.
Ms. DeBruzen.
I think that point goes exactly to the trade risk point, which is imposing obligations. I think actually Mr. Shampoo, even when he was speaking about it, spoke about Canadian versus international and what we can impose on international actors, taking into account the trade obligations and good relations between countries. So that is the main piece that I would put to that is I think that even in his question, he kind of drew the distinction of where that trade risk would lie.
Mr. Shampoo, should I go to you or would you rather hear from the department? Let's go to you first.
En fait, on revient un petit
In fact, this leads to the argument that I brought up a little earlier today's meeting, Mr. Chair. If there's an undertaking that wants to do business abroad, that company would have to respect the rules in that country, whether it be activities online or brick and mortar activities. No matter where I do business in the world, I have to respect the broadcasting rules in that country. Now, if we impose rules, I think we have to stop at a certain time and decide which are those rules that we want to impose. What kind of fairness do we want to establish in the broadcasting system? We want to regulate our own market, and my opinion is that everyone should be behaving fairly, and it's not up to one category of broadcasters to be accepted.
Ms. DeBruzen?
I just wanted to clarify. I mean, there is a negotiation, a negotiation piece that's part of our motion as well. It's not actually true to say that there would be no, nothing paid. And it's about striking a fair deal, and there is a negotiation part to that amendment that I just wanted to highlight.
Mr. Shampoo.
Alors, j'imagine qu'il y a...
So I would imagine there would be no problem removing the mention of without terms and conditions and replacing it by with terms or conditions. That would be in keeping with the other parts of the law?
Sorry, some confusion there. Before I go to Ms. DeBruzen, are you proposing a sub-amendment, Mr. Shampoo?
Je vais attendre la réponse.
I will wait for Ms. DeBruzen's answer before I propose a sub-amendment.
Well, I guess I'll presuppose that sub-amendment, but the answer would be no. I wouldn't be in agreement with that.
Okay. Mr. Shampoo.
Monsieur le Président, moi, je veux...
Mr. Chair, I would like to propose a sub-amendment, but I haven't written it out. I might need Mr. Mela to help me formulate it appropriately. But in E.2, or rather E.1, I would use with a certain terms or conditions for online undertakings. So with terms and conditions, that would be the change. And I'm open to other suggestions.
Okay, Mr. Shampoo, I'm going to proceed. I'll just the change, the sub-amendment that you're asking for here is quite straightforward and simple, I guess, in both languages. So it's
Mr. Chair.
Sorry, yes,
sorry.
Mr. Mela, go ahead.
If I may propose something to Mr. Shampoo.
Okay.
L'obligation, selon les modalités qu'il précise, est-ce que ça...
Requirement according to terms and conditions.
Oh.
Would that work for you?
Est-ce que ça marche?
Okay. Mr. Mela, sorry, I think we may have lost you at the end. Are you satisfied with that? Okay. I am not hearing from Mr. Mela.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want me to repeat what I just said?
No, it's fine. I thought we were adding more, but you thought your microphone was cut off, but apparently not. Mr. Shampoo.
Je voudrais qu'il soit quand même précisé.
I would like it to be specified that it's with terms and conditions. A requirement according to the terms and conditions? Yes, I do think that is an acceptable wording.
Okay. So now that we have agreed upon wording in French and then through the interpretation, seeing no further comment, is now just so that is everyone comfortable with the wording that's been talked about thus far? Seeking no clarification. Now let's go to a vote. This is on the sub-amendment from Mr. Champoux on G9. Shall the sub-amendment carry?
No.
Hearing no, and only no, we now go to a vote. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Champoux sub-amendment? Mr. Housefather?
Contre.
For the sub-amendment of G9. Madame Bissette?
No.
Ms. DeBruson?
No.
Ms. Ian?
No.
Mr. Lewis?
No.
Monsieur Reyes?
No.
Mr. Aitchison?
No.
Mr. Shields?
No.
Mr. Waugh?
No.
Mr. Champoux?
Oui.
Ms. McPherson?
Oui.
9 nays, 2 yeas.
Okay, so I declare the sub-amendment negative. We now return back to G9, which is our main amendment. Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could we have the department explain the role that CRTC would have with this change that's being proposed?
Mr. Ripley.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Shields. And just to clarify, what is on the table through this amendment is an extension with some changes of what we call mandatory distribution in the conventional system. So right now, the CRTC has the ability to require cable and satellite companies to carry certain TV channels, such as APTN or CPAC or your provincial legislative channel. And the CRTC has the ability to impose terms and conditions on that, requiring Canadian cable and satellite companies to in some instances, not only carry APTN, but actually pay a per subscriber fee to APTN, for example. The committee heard from certain witnesses who felt it was very important that as Bill C-10 moves forward, that the CRTC have a lever like it does in the current system to require online undertakings to carry certain channels. And so the amendment that you have before you would allow the CRTC, and yes, it would be the CRTC that would make this kind of order, but it could allow, for example, a service like Amazon channels or Apple or something like that to carry APTN, for example, as part of its lineup. The difference is, and this is where the debate has been focusing, the difference is whether the CRTC should have the ability to require the terms and conditions of that contractual arrangement. And the amendment before you proposes that the CRTC not be granted that power, but rather that the parties be required to negotiate in good faith and the CRTC be equipped to facilitate those negotiations where appropriate. And if ever you had a party that not negotiate in good faith, the CRTC would have the ability to levy administrative monetary penalties against that party acting in bad faith. And the reason for that is, the context and the economy, the marketplace is quite different between the conventional system and the new system. And in the online world, there is less of an issue of shelf space, and so we know in the vast majority, in many circumstances right now, the commercial arrangement between a service like Amazon Channels or Apple, they'll come to a revenue sharing agreement, right? And so the goal here is to require those services to carry potentially carry certain Canadian services and require them to negotiate in good faith to come to a reasonable revenue sharing agreement, which typically these days looks approximately 50-50 in most cases. I hope that helps clarify.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering, first of all, I'd like to propose a sub-amendment, but would it be possible, I mean, one of the other options would be just to take the without terms or conditions completely out. So that might be a possibility. I'm not sure if that would limit if that would be treated, I guess it would be treated as a sub-amendment. I have that and another sub-amendment I'd like to put forward, I guess.
Okay, it's definitely a sub-amendment, but I think you're seeking clarification from the department as well.
Yes, if that would be
okay.
A good thing.
Looking to the departments. Any volunteers? Seeing no. Mr. Ripley.
It's the delay, Mr. Chair, is because we're organizing our thoughts on that.
Actually,
what I would,
Mr. Ripley, sorry, if you'd like to take a few more seconds, you can do that if you wish to collect your thoughts on the question.
Well, what I would say is the law is specific generally where it grants the CRTC the power to impose terms or conditions, and so I think our view is that even if you struck it, again, because there are other instances in the Act, I think, where it explicitly references terms and conditions, the reading would likely be that it doesn't include it here. That said, I think it increases the ambiguity about whether the CRTC would have the power or not to impose terms or conditions. So I think it would be a more ambiguous outcome.
I have Mr. Shields. Mr. Shields, is that your legacy hand from before? Or? There we go. Ms. McPherson.
So then I will not put that sub-amendment forward, but I do have another sub-amendment that I would like to put forward if I could.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Thank you. In clause 7, or in number 7, not clause, sorry, but in number 7, the commission may facilitate those negotiations. I would like it to say the commission may facilitate those negotiations of the parties to the negotiations, or even just to end at the end of negotiations. I haven't gotten it in my head yet, but what I'd like to remove is at the joint request. I don't think that that's required. I don't think that's necessary.
Okay, so you've put out a couple options. Did you want to put that to the department to see which option you'd like?
Perhaps that would be the best thing to do. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, Mr. Ripley, I have to go back to you again. You did understand what was just proposed?
I do, and I would actually probably defer to Mr. Mela on the drafting. But just to clarify, there would indeed be a substantial change. So right now, as drafted, facilitation could only be invoked at the joint request of the parties, meaning that if one party wanted facilitation but the other party didn't, you wouldn't meet the test for engaging the facilitation. So Ms. McPherson's change would allow one party. My understanding is that it would allow one party or the other to essentially engage the facilitation.
So Ms. McPherson, I hope that clears up the intentions of what you hope to do. The only thing we're not clear, for the sake of myself and Mr. Mela, which option would you like to propose for an amendment?
I could, having a few more seconds here to look at this, I could sub-amend just removing the joint. So at the request of parties to the negotiations, so and just remove the word joint.
So just so that everyone's clear, what Ms. McPherson is proposing as a sub-amendment is now to sub-amend number 7 to say the commission may facilitate those negotiations at the request of the parties to the negotiations, removing the word joint. I have Mr. Shields.
So to clarify that, you're talking about binding arbitration? Is that what you're moving to, is binding arbitration by doing that?
Ms. McPherson, I'm going to take a couple questions. Maybe Mr. Housefather also has some questions for you. Let me just go to Mr. Housefather and Mr. Shampoo, then I'll come back to you, Ms. McPherson, at the end. Thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank Ms. McPherson. I actually think the right way to say it would be at the request of either party, because what you want to do is allow one party, the weaker party in the negotiations, to have the right to do this. And I guess I think I support that. I just wanted to ask the department, in the context of these negotiations, and Mr. Chair, you could allow that question to go to them whenever you think is appropriate based on the sequencing of the order. But I would like to hear from the department as to, would there be any problem should we allow, presumably one side is going to be a weaker party here, that one side in the weaker state to ask for the department, the CRTC's intervention. I cannot see a trade risk in doing it that way. I just wanted to check to make sure that the department also didn't see that this would be a trade risk. But I think that the right way to word it, if Ms. McPherson agrees with me, would be may facilitate those negotiations at the request of either party to the negotiations. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I think given your question and the relevance, I'm going to go to the department first to respond to that, because I think that would serve well. Mr. Ripley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question, Mr. Housefather. Well, I won't comment on the trade risk. What I would say is that you know, the effect of this would allow either party, one or the other, to request facilitation, and it would prevent, as you pointed out, a party from stymieing the process by refusing to go to facilitation. Perhaps on the concerns you've raised about, you know, does this risk in increasing trade tensions? What I would say is, you know, the outcome would require, again, an online undertaking to submit to facilitation at the request of the other party. So it takes a little more of an interventionist stance. But what I would highlight, and perhaps this actually is responding to Mr. Shields' question, is that, you know, the outcome of this process is not binding arbitration. What the government has put on the table is very explicitly a facilitation exercise, and is different than binding arbitration, which does exist in the current environment, whereby the CRTC actually has the power at the end of the day to impose a deal. What this amendment drives to is slightly different in the sense of, again, it is trying to help the parties reach a mutually good deal, so to speak. And again, if ever there was an instance where a party was engaging in bad faith, if they weren't engaging in good faith, that is backed up by the CRTC having the ability to impose administrative monetary penalties to respond to that bad faith behavior on a party who may not be playing games, so to speak.
Mr. Shampoo.
Monsieur.
Mr. Ripley answered my question.
Voilà. Okay, merci beaucoup. So now we return. Now, Ms. McPherson, did you want to end on that? Some of the issues there were brought your way. We are now on your sub-amendment, so go ahead.
Only to say that I appreciate Mr. Housefather's intervention, and the wording makes more sense to put it that way. It's always a challenge to try to write these things in our heads as we go, but his legal background has helped me out there. So I still think that it would make a lot of sense to make sure that there is a more equitable ability to request the negotiations. And so I do like the sub-amendment put forward by Mr. Housefather that says the Commission may facilitate those negotiations at the request of either of the parties to the negotiations.
Okay, Ms. McPherson, we unfortunately I can't move that right now because we're dealing with yours. What the normal thing is we have to dispense with the sub-amendment that you already moved.
Sorry, it was just rewording of mine.
Sorry, Ms. McPherson, go ahead.
Sorry, Only it was the exact same sub amendment. It was just the rewording of it. Can we not update the wording considering the speed at which we're running through this?
I understand. And yes, I'll let that pass. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to do that or not, but nevertheless, given just the small, minute details of what you're talking about, why not? And can I have the will of the committee to proceed that way? Thank you so much, everybody. So for the sake of clarification, can you read the new and improved, if I may use that term, sub amendment of yours?
The shiny new one.
Yes.
The commission may facilitate those negotiations at the request of either of the parties to the negotiations.
Okay. Does everyone have an understanding? We now go to a vote. Shall the sub amendment from Ms. McPherson of G9 carry? So carried. We now return to the main amendment. Oh, sorry. I heard a no. Mr. Reyes? Was that you that said no?
J'ai dit non.
Yes, I said no, Mr. Chair.
Can we do it on
Okay.
division, please, Mr. Chair?
Pardon me? Sorry. I had a volume.
Right, on division, Mr. Chair?
Okay. So will that be carried on division?
Parfait.
Perfect.
Carried on division on the sub amendment. We now go back to G9, the main amendment. Any further discussion? Seeing none, call for a vote. This is a vote on G9. Shall G9 carry? So carry. Oh, we got a no.
On division?
Let's try this again. Carried on division?
No.
No. On division.
Sorry, Mr. Reyes, what was proposed was carried on division, like yes, carried, but on division. Do you want to have a recorded vote?
Oui, exactement.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
A question on G9 as amended. Mr. Housefather.
Yes.
Madame Bissette.
Oui.
Ms. DeBruson.
Yes.
Ms. Ian.
Yes.
Mr. Lewis.
Yes.
Monsieur Reyes.
No.
Mr. Aitchison.
No.
Mr. Shields.
No.
Mr. Waugh.
No.
Mr. Champou.
Oui.
Ms. McPherson.
Yes.
Seven yeas, 4 nays.
7 yeas, 4 nays. Is that correct? Yeah, sorry. Okay, so I carried. G9 carried. Now, the vote on G9 applies to G16, as I mentioned earlier. So if you're following along in your hymn books, folks, we go to G16 as a consequence. Okay, we now go to BQ21. Mr. Champou.
Alors, c'est simplement.
So it is simply an addition to allow the CRTC. Mr. Chair, just a point of order first.
Sorry, yes. Point of order, Mr. Reyes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to make sure I understood. As the committee carried G9, even though we voted against it, is the next amendment removed?
No. Basically, what has happened here, Mr. Reyes, there are two amendments that the ruling from the table was that they were consequential, one depending on the other. So they are G9 and G16. And because we passed G9, that will now also apply to G16, which is further ahead in the agenda. I'm not sure what page it is on your agenda, but race ahead there, you'll find
113. 113.
There you go. 1/3. Thank you, Mr. Waugh. Okay. Mr. Reyes, would you like to pause for just a second?
I just found it. I'm sorry about this. It's because I don't know the process. But does that mean that we will come back to G16 with changes to what we just voted on, or will we no longer need to be looking at Can I put this sheet away?
You can, yeah. Feel free to put it away.
Thanks.
Okay, good. All right, back to BQ21, Mr. Shampoo.
Juste dire à M. Rayet.
I just wanted to say to Mr. Reyes that I hope he didn't print back and front because he might get rid of an important BQ motion. So now, BQ21 is just to add a subparagraph. So the expenditures to be made by persons carrying on broadcasting undertakings for the purposes set out in subsection 11.1 parentheses 1. This is to give the CRTC certain powers regarding expenditures.
Any further discussion on BQ21? Seeing no further discussion, we now go to a vote. Shall BQ21 carry?
No.
Hearing no.
On division,
Can we say carried on division, Mr. Reyes, or would you like a recorded vote?
Vote par appel nominal, s'il vous plaît.
A recorded vote, please.
Madam Clerk?
BQ 21, Mr. Housefather.
Pour.
Madame Bissette.
Oui.
Mr. Bruson.
yes.
Ms. Ian.
Yes.
Mr. Lewis.
Yes.
Monsieur Reyes.
No.
Mr. Aitchison.
No.
Mr. Shields.
No.
Mr. Waugh.
No.
Monsieur Shampoo.
En faveur.
Ms. McPherson.
Yes.
7 yeas, 4 nays. Mr. Chair?
Sorry.
7 yeas, 4 nays.
Right, I declare BQ21 carried. That brings us to PV21. As deemed moved, we now go to Mr. Manley.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I propose this amendment because a small number of big broadcasters that control access to broadcasting disproportionately impose their conditions on independent producers. The Yale report noted this major power imbalance and recommended that the CRTC should regulate these relationships. This amendment adds that the CRTC may impose conditions of service to establish a framework for contractual practices between broadcasters and independent producers. A framework would serve as a tool to better support independent producers in contract negotiations. This amendment is related to Amendment PV23, which would also enable the creation of regulations to establish contractual frameworks. And the organizations that supported this were the Coalition for the Diversity of Cultural Expression, the Alliance des Producteurs Francophones de Canada, and the Canadian Media Producers Association. So I hope the committee members will support this amendment. Thank you.
Mr. Brusen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to say that much of the intent would be covered by Lib 7, which is coming up, but this is a really rigid approach for this and getting involved in contractual arrangements in a way that's very prescriptive and rigid, and so would not be the preferred means of going about it. Would suggest that Lib 7 is a better way to proceed.
Mr. Shields.
So to Mr. Manley, when you're talking about a framework, do you want to expand on what you mean by a framework? Are you talking an extensive piece of documentation? Because this is something you've been talking about a bit as we've gone through this process. So can you describe what a framework would be? What are we talking about? A bureaucratic? I'm a little concerned when you use the word framework.
Okay, given the nature of the question, Ms. McPherson, before I go to you, Mr. Manley, do you want to respond to that?
Sure, a contractual framework would set some parameters around how these contracts would be set up between the big broadcasters and independent producers. Like the Yale report identifies that this is a power imbalance, and it's something that has been identified as needing to be fixed.
Ms. McPherson.
It would be up to the CRTC to determine what that framework looks like.
Ms. McPherson.
Thank you. And I like this amendment, so I will be supporting it. I think that it offers up more certainty and more insurance to the smaller producers that the commission will have the power to level the playing field in negotiation with broadcasters. So I commend Mr. Manley for bringing this forward, and I'll be supporting it.
Mr. Shampoo.
J'aimerais juste faire un parallèle. On est en train de
I have a point in parallel. We are rewriting the Broadcasting Act because the market is unfair. We have 3 major telecoms companies in Canada. The market is unfair, and that is why we are going back over C10. But there are even smaller players in this market who are much more heavily impacted. And we need something to support them in the current situation, but also for the future. So I don't think this is a bad amendment at all, and we will support it.
Mr. Housefather.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to speak to this because I'm of two minds. I actually am also very sympathetic to the idea of the independent producers and the lack of power that they have in relationships. I listened to both sides, and that is why I actually drafted Lib 7 in the way that I did, because the main issue was the exploitative nature of the relationship, which led the independent producers to not be able to retain their intellectual property. And so I tried to find a balance. In Lib 7, I tried to incorporate what would constitute a Canadian program for the purposes of the Act. And in so doing, I said that the Commission must consider whether Canadians own and control intellectual property rights over Canadian programs for exploitation purposes, and that they have to retain a material portion of the value. And I also stated that one of the requirements is whether online undertakings and programming undertakings collaborate with Canadian independent producers. And I think that the way I did it in Lib 7 is preferable to the way it's set out in PV 21. So I will vote against PV 21 because I support Lib 7, but I am sympathetic to the request, and I appreciate Mr. Manley's efforts here. Thank you.
Mr. Reyes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's 1 minute left to the meeting. I would like to ask a question. This evening we have another 2-hour meeting, but there's a vote at the same time. And I would like to know, what will the procedure be around the vote?
Sorry, Mr. Reyes. The meeting in question is actually next Monday, which is the May 3rd. It's not tonight. It's May 3rd is the proposed extra meeting that we applied for, and we have. So you will not be asking you to come this evening. I'm not sure if I answered fully your question.
Parfait. Donc,
Perfect. So I don't know how I got mixed up with my Mondays. So this evening it'll be a little more quiet. Thank you.
That's all right. As the song says, I don't like Mondays either, so we're all good. Any further discussion on PV 21? Seeing no further discussion, we'll now go to a vote. So shall PV 21 carry?
No.
I hear no.
no.
No. Madam Clerk?
Can we negative on division?
Sorry.
on division.
Okay.
Oui,
Very
oui,
good.
dissidence.
So do I hear negative on division? So done. PV 21 negatived on division. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that brings us to a conclusion. And we will see you. The next meeting, of course, will be on April 30th, this coming Friday. Same time, as I mentioned before, we were unable to get extra hours for Friday, so we will be meeting in our normal 2-hour block. Following that, on May 3rd, we have 2 meetings that day scheduled on C10. If we finish with C10, we can discuss at that point. We'll see how we're doing on April 30th. I think April 30th will give us a far better indication of how we're going to do for May 3rd. Nevertheless, thank you to our officials from the department. Thank you for everybody participating virtually here and abroad. Thanks, everyone. Meeting adjourned.